this webinar on the national reviews on progress of women and girls 25 years from the World Conference on Women held in Beijing in 1995. Welcome to our participants from Africa, Europe, North and South America. It's wonderful to have a wide variety of participation here. I'm Cecilia O'Dwyer and I'm in the NGO office at the moment with Francesca, our youth representative, and my co-worker Cynthia, who's at the moment in India and will be with us on the webinar as well. Now, thanks to our presenters for the preparation they did for this, and they will speak to the national review of their own country, because each country has been invited to present a national review of the 25 years since the Beijing conference. How have women and girls progressed? What are the challenges and where do we need to go? So let's move on now to our panel of speakers, right? And I'll introduce you. Are we all there? Yes. Okay. Let's see if I can see. Right. Now let's look at the panel that you're seeing there. Right beside me, to the right, you have Imelda Poole from Albania. Beside Imelda, Pat Hanvey, who's in Zambia. Francesca, then down to the second row on the left, Mary Elizabeth Kirk from Peru, Aurora Moreno from Spain, Fionnuala Lynch from Ireland, Maria Lopez from Morocco, and then to the third line, Cynthia Matthew, who's in India but belongs here to the NGO office, and Catherine Keir from the UK. So it's just so good to have you all here, and you worked so hard preparing this. Now we have our 45 minutes, a little less than 45 minutes, and we've a lot of ground to cover. So I would invite you to make your responses, precise and to the point, just so that we can get through as much information as quickly as possible. So let's go now. And first of all, I think we'll go to Africa, right? And we'll go down to now, but before, hold on a minute, before I go to Africa, that has just reminded me that I would like to remember a person from Africa, from Zimbabwe, Faith Dlamini, who was to be on this webinar today, but Faith is traveling at the moment and hasn't been able to connect. And that is a pity, because Faith is the African-born person, who would have been on the webinar today, and that's just a pity. And then another person I would like to remember is Sister Petra from Romania. She was the Romanian province UN representative, but recently she has moved to South Sudan. So we wish Petra all the best in South Sudan, and she did a very good report on the findings from Romania. So thank you both, and we remember you both. So now let's go to Africa, and we'll begin with you, Pat. So would you just like to just give us a couple of issues or points, 2 or 3 at the most, that impressed you in the report from Zambia?
Okay, well, one of the things that impressed me was the amount of policy and legal frameworks that have been strengthened and put in place for gender equality and to try to redress existing gender imbalances. The government has set up a ministry for gender, so there's actually a member of parliament specifically allocated to gender issues. There's a Gender Equity and Equality Commission has been set up. There were 2 acts that were put in place in 2015, one on gender equity and equality, and there was a constitutional amendment at that time as well. And there's also been big campaign around gender-based violence. It has become very visible, and victim support units have been established countrywide and been attached to most police stations. And instruments to bring charges, to investigate and bring charges against people of gender violence has been put in place. And there's been a major increase, or a significant increase. In 2014, 15,000 cases of gender violence were reported. In 2018, there was over 20,000. So that's, I mean, I can see it in action even in the remote corner of Lukulu where I live and work, because recently I brought a lady from the police station to the hospital because she had reported that she was beaten by her husband during the night. So it's increasing there. There's been increase in parliamentarians as well. From 14% in 2011 female parliamentarians to 19% in 2018. And we also have a female vice president. And that's on the legal structure. There's been a very significant increase in the health and well-being, and especially mother and child health. But maternal deaths have decreased significantly. In 2000, they were over 500 per 100,000. Now they are 183 per 100,000. And they're not yet on target. The target is for 2030, 70 per 100,000. So they're not on target there yet. But, you know, again, the government is trying very hard there. There's an increase in health posts and health facilities throughout the country, even in the rural area where we live. There's a priority to get trained staff to help women in childbirth. There's been an introduction of a department health system where data is collected on a weekly basis, even from the remote places, fed into the districts and then fed into the provincial health authorities. And there's teams have been trained to help sensitize women and encourage them to go to health facilities for birth.
Yeah,
Yeah, just the last one that I want to mention, there's been significant improvement in learning opportunities for girls and women. The government has introduced a re-entry policy for girls because a lot of young girls get pregnant at the time of when they're at school. And before that would meant a final dropout, but now they're encouraged to reapply. The schools have to take children back to school who have left because of pregnancy. There's a keeping girls in school policy targeted towards the most vulnerable. And that was established in the government with the World Bank supporting that, targeting 25,000 girls in very poor circumstances, giving them, paying their fees, uniform and whatever. And we can see that functioning very much in our remote area as well. CampEd, which is a donor-driven intervention, is very successful. They have targeted over 300 girls.
Thank you very much for that, Pat, because they're doing really, really, you know, I mean, it's wonderful to see all of this happening, and it's just so good that we're actually hearing about it all together. So thank you very much for that. And we'll move on to Northern Africa, to Morocco. Now, Maria prepared this with the staff from the center that we have in North Morocco, in Asila. So Maria, would you just like to come in there and just tell us a couple of points to begin with, just that you there, and all of you there, have seen in terms of progress?
Yes, hello. This is Maria, but I don't see myself in the screen.
Well, we see you. We see you. You're okay.
Very well. Okay, then. I will speak, even though I don't know where I am. As you said, I have prepared this with the teachers, and they have already asked. They also asked the women whom they teach either language, their own language, or cutting out and dressmaking. So, according to the report, there are very numerous laws in favor of women, of which we can mention the consolidation of laws against discrimination and violence towards women and girls. Then there is also a law about protection of female domestic workers. They are improving another law, improving women's social welfare services. There are other laws about women in prisoners, how they are treated there. They have the chance of formation, which is very good, even when they leave the prison. And then there are a lot of laws. In the past 5 years, the legislation body has been increased a lot. Yeah, so this is what I can say.
Yeah, thank you.
What I can say so far.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much for that, Maria. Now, let's move over to South America. Mary Elizabeth, are you there in Lima? And would you like to, would you like maybe to speak a bit about, right, we've been hearing some of the good things, and maybe I'm just thinking in terms of like some of the gaps, you know, if you can speak a bit into this, some of the good things that have happened and the gaps that you're seeing and how they might be, how NGOs and that are trying to address it.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say that our main achievement in this country has been in terms of legislation. The laws are very good, and they are covering everything that we would want them to cover. This is admitted even in the document itself. It says that it must be said that legal and institutional changes in favor of gender equality are the main achievement. It's a state roadmap, but we're not there yet. So you want, so I'll look at why we're not there yet. There's very good legislation, but there's a very long way to go. Now, if I were to, probably the biggest gap that there is at the local level. There is much to be done in awareness raising among the local authorities, such as police, who are often indifferent and unwilling to make the changes necessary. For example, recently, of all the deaths, there were 20 deaths in January of women in domestic violence. And the majority of those had asked for police protection, and they hadn't been given it. And the death was the result. The other thing is that the report admits that there has not been sufficient attention given to the social organization, the way society is organized here, which forms the basis of discrimination against women. And obstacles persist in the country, which prevent the full realization of the human right to education for women. For example, these include the need for children to work at home, in caregiving, and early pregnancies, obviously, and the situation of poverty in the country.
Yes.
Maternal deaths, yes, have been reduced greatly, but not everywhere. And any of the statistics that we see, for example, in education, the statistics show that women have exceeded men in the number of women or girls attending school. But when you break that down in terms of where people live and the cultures, it's very different. You have to think, for example, of this country like a patchwork. It's a patchwork, especially in the Amazon region, a patchwork of peoples and languages and tribes. And when you look into any one of those, especially in the Amazon region, you find that there's very little coverage by the government. And sometimes when there are services provided by the government, they're not adapted to the culture. For example, in maternity services, the idea of women being attended by male doctors, being touched by male doctors, is really unacceptable in the culture of the tribes in the Amazon. So now a lot has been done, and there are good plans to give education in the language of the people receiving it.
Yeah.
There are two main languages, native languages in the country, as you know, Aymara and the other one, which slips my mind now. But there are dozens of other languages. So the challenge really is huge. The challenge is huge. We have a roadmap. We're on the way. We have a long, long way to go.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for that. That's wonderful information, Mary Elizabeth. Thank you. Now let's move to Europe. And we'll start over the eastern part of Europe, right? Imelda, are you there from Albania? And would you like just to bring us in a bit on some of the progress that you've seen and maybe some of the gaps, you know, in from your context there, right?
Okay, good evening, everybody. Just to say that it's almost like a repetition of Pat in Africa. But one of the main issues of really good news is that they've completely reorganized the structures of the government to include women and girls in a more effective manner for implementation of law. So before 2016, it was all these issues related to women's violence or violence against women, or any issue to do with employment or birth or health came under youth and employment, which was crazy because it was hidden under other issues. Now it's under social security and health. And that has brought to the fore very rapidly the issues concerning women in Albania. The law itself, since the last 5 years, has escalated in renewal relating to women, and this can't be anything but be good. And we do have if you like, a country strategy of good practice towards care and respect and human rights towards women. This is in paper, so just take it that, yes, in writing, we've probably got the best laws that you could ever want to have in Albania on behalf of women and girls. The other good thing is that for the first time, say over the last 5 years, women are being trained in the police and in the army for office. Now, not many have gone into office yet, but at least they're preparing women for this future change, maybe. You asked me, Cecilia, what's preventing that good news, if you like, from booming into good practice? And the problem for us in Albania is that the culture, which goes back to pre-Turkish time. If you remember, Albania's been occupied for nearly 600 years. So the pre-cultural law was called Kanan, and it's deeply in the blood of the people. So patriarchy and treatment of girls and women comes out of cultural norms rather than good practice in the law. So constantly ourselves as Mary Ward Loreto, working in 6 regions around the country, we're all the time trying to work for human rights, but against cultural norms. So girls are taken out of school at 13 to keep them pure for early marriage in the villages and in the small towns. So, I mean, I could give you so many examples of this. So we're in conflict between cultural law and state law, which isn't implemented because it's a failed democracy in Albania. So law is weak, even though on paper it's hugely strong. I think maybe that's enough from me.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Imelda. And there again, the thing of the culture, because that has actually come up in the overall, what they call the Secretary General's report, you know, the clash or the conflict between the culture and the actual civil law in the country. You know, it's so, and I think we picked it up a bit there in the Amazons as well, you know, and maybe a bit in Africa, but it happens everywhere. Right, so thank you very much for that, Imelda. Now we'll move over now to Western continental Europe, and Aurora from Madrid. Are you there, Aurora? And now would you tell us like what you focused on and what you found there, kind of the progress and a little bit about maybe some of the challenges as well.
All right. One of the things that I focused on was the violence against women. A few years ago, there was an important law in Spain. It was an agreement from all political parties, and it was called National Agreement Against Gender Violence Against Women. It was very important, but still there are some gaps in here, especially there are still protection to victims is still not enough. We still have women that are killed by their husbands every year. There are no, for example, no centers of specialized attention to victims of sexual violence in every province. There are still recommendations from CEDAW that haven't still been addressed. There is always lack of finance, of funding, just to address all the necessities, all the needs of the victims.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. Yeah, I'll come back to you again about another point that came up there. So now we'll move up now to UK. Catherine, are you there, yes. Catherine? Yes, would you come in now? Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start with a short quotation from the document that I've been looking at in the UK. And it says, as we approach the 25th anniversary of the landmark adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the UK reaffirms its proud commitment to gender equality, women's empowerment, and the full realisation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And this is endorsed by Her Majesty the Queen in her speech in December at the beginning of our new Parliament. And it's also endorsed by Liz Truss, who is a recently appointed Minister for Women and Gender Equality. So in many ways, I can identify with a lot of things that have been said by previous speakers, in the sense that we have lots of strategies in place for further empowerment of women and girls, greater progress in education in terms of equality for boys and girls in education and in employment and in wages. But I just want to highlight one particular area from the report. It says, this is in connection with mental health. The 5-year forward view for mental health identified that 1 in 5 mothers suffers from depression, anxiety, or in some cases psychosis during pregnancy in the first year of childbirth. Now, throughout the country, we have lots of very, very good organisations tackling the development of babies in the early stages of childhood, the first weeks, months, and first year. But equally, we have local governments and councils cutting the funding for these centres. So that would be one of my worries, and I'm mentioning it because it's something that no one else has mentioned in their report. And that's one of the things that concerns me. And apart from that, as everybody knows, we in this part of the world consider ourselves to be a rich country, and the UK is very rich in wealth and resources, but they are not evenly distributed.
Thank you.
So
thank you very much for that, Catherine. Really interesting comments there. We'll move over now to Ireland. Fionnuala.
Dear Eve to all on this lovely international event. I'd just like to begin by just looking at the opening paragraph actually from the report from Ireland, and it talks about how the Department of Justice and Equality consulted with the wide range of other government departments and agencies, and they all serve on what we call the National Strategy for Women and Girls. This was set up in 2017. It was set up by the then Taoiseach, I suppose we'd call that our Vice Prime Minister. Her name was Frances Fitzgerald. She was Minister for Justice at the time. And her reason for setting it up was to address the remaining obstacles to women's equality. And she wanted this strategy to shine a light on equal roles for women and girls in all aspects of society. So that was back in 2017. Moving on from that, in June 2019, our present Taoiseach, I suppose, Prime Minister, announced the government's intentions to establish a citizens' assembly on gender equality. This began in 2019 in October, with a view to and make recommendations in respect of the gender pay gap, women's advancement in their professions, and unequal sharing of the burden of care among women and men. This assembly met 2 weeks ago, and it's made up of 99 citizens throughout Ireland and a chairperson. And the range of topics, as I said, they include really the world of work. And in those topics would be equal pay. Why is it that there are so many more women in the low paid sectors? What is the impact of different stages in life on your career choices? In the area of caring, which has traditionally here in Ireland been a responsibility primarily of women and women in the home. And the topics looked at there are who looks after the children, who looks after the elderly, how do we share care more equally between men and women? And the other two areas the Assembly are going to look at is the public sphere and the topics such as women in politics, women in media, and gender stereotyping. So that is happening as we speak. And the suggestions from the citizens will go back to the government and will be the framework for legislation in the next year. That is the plan. So it's good to see that's happening on a democratic level. As mentioned by other people, I notice a lot of legislation, but the implementation of it is a little slower. I already mentioned that our Prime Minister initiated the Assembly in 2019, so October 2019. So it's a little late in the sense of the report now happening. So I'm aware of a lot of legislation and a lot of strategies, but the implementation seems to have happened at the last minute.
I think
So that's all I'd say at the minute.
Thank you very much, Finola. It's just so interesting, like the whole question of civil society participation, you know, that is so important in every country. And it's one of the things they're trying to kind of push from here and learn from one another from here. So it is good to hear that. Now, I'll move on to, it's basically our office, NGO office, but it's Cynthia. And Cynthia, who is in India at the moment, patiently awaiting her visa to get back to the States. And Cynthia went through the country reports from the perspective of girls. So Cynthia, would you like to come in there now and just tell us, just give us both the progress and some of the challenges that were found. If you could do that for us, it would be really good. Now she needs to be muted there. Yeah. What? Would you mute yourself, Cynthia, if you can there? Go up to the top, I think up to the top. What do we see? You can't mute her.
Yes.
Yeah, there you are.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so I went through the reports of few countries and noticed that countries are realizing that empowering girls and young women contributes to transformation of the country's economic future as well as the development of its people. So therefore various forums, commissions and empowerment frameworks are created to work towards it. Countries are taking action to improve gender equality. However, there is a long way to go to bridge this gap. Many countries are giving priorities for accelerating progress for women and girls. Some countries are introducing and strengthening the social protection programs for women and girls. and countries are making efforts to improve education outcome for girls. And some of the challenges that I found while going through the reports, mainly the violence against women and girls continues to be a big problem for in almost all the countries. It does not mean which country you belong, rich or poor, women and girls are faced with various forms of violence. And secondly, finance is a huge challenge for developing countries. They find it difficult to implement various schemes and programs due to lack of finance, unable to spend on social protection, health, education, etc. Another challenge is cultural and religious practices that which are barriers in many societies. These practices prevent women and young girls to be empowered and to be on the mainstream of the society.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that, Cynthia. Yeah, that really gives a good, very cohesive kind of overall view of the whole lot. Just I'd like to mention, before we move on, you know, like we're looking now at the national reports from the Beijing+25, and they feed into what is called the Commission on the Status of Women. Now, on the other hand, in 2015, the what's called the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which you all know about, they were shall we say, approved by all the member states actually, and you have the specific goal on women there. You know, like that has been a shift from women kind of being on the margin to they're coming right into the center, which is wonderful. It's the whole agenda is people-centered, but it's women-centered as well, in as much as we can make it. So that goal 5 is really important. But then it's not only goal 5, women are actually transversal in the whole agenda. So you can keep that in mind. And I know we're working on it in different ways already, because no matter what goal of those 17 goals you look at it, there's always the women's perspective and how are women being challenged and how are women helping progress in any of those goals. So just keep that in mind, because it's another kind of way of looking at it. We could be speaking about this for hours. It's all very, very interesting. So now I just want to move on to Francesca. Have you got any, let's look first of all, I don't know if you have comments or questions that have come up there by any chance.
Yes, we have one question from Anna, who's a CJ currently in Lebanon, and she asks, with regard to cultural issues, do we also look at and address the role of religions? I'm not only thinking about Islam, but also to the role that churches play.
And Cynthia, yeah, may come in there because she's just answered it, I think, yeah. Would you like to come back in, Cynthia, just? Is it stuck? Wait, then you're okay. Right. Oh, what's that? Sorry about this. Well, if we can't get Cynthia. Am I on mute? Oh my gosh. I didn't think I was. Sorry about that. Oh my gosh. How long have I been on mute? Do you remember? I think, what? Oh, yeah, that's okay. But I think you may have got that now. The question of the culture and religion, and how they can impede, shall we say, progress at times. Right. Okay. So now, Francesca, is there anything else there you'd like to comment on? that has come up? Yeah.
Just in terms of something that came up, and it came up again in yesterday, the Asia Australia webinar, is this idea that there's been a lot of progress in terms of legislation and creating kind of programs and frameworks, but there seems to be a lack of implementation. And I think, again, that comes from difficulties that come with cultural issues.
Right, thank you very much for that. Now we'll just give another round. We have about 8 minutes left. So I suppose now, if we just kind of look, if you think, each one of you, what you would like to say, you know, or what you would like to finish off saying, because we won't have time for much more than just another round. So it might be those of you who have actually thought back the 25 years. I don't know if we have anybody today who was at the Beijing conference. We did at the Asia Australia one. We had people who were actually at Beijing, but some of us were around at that time, right? So we can look and see, well, what has happened in those 25 years. That would be one way of looking at it. Another thing might be to actually just see if there's anything that you would like to say that came up for you, and I say, I really need to say this to the world, right? Okay, so we'll start off now there with let's see now. Let's begin with Aurora. I'm going to go a different way this time.
Well, I think there are two important things. One of them is that we still have a lot of work to do, and we must keep the pace. And it is important not to go back, to be aware, just to know, don't go step by step, don't go back. And also, I think it was Fiona, she was talking about this. I think it's very important to have into account what is happening with the time that women use for care. I mean, there are still a lot of areas of the life, family life, or maybe house, taking care of children and old people that are mainly done by women. And maybe it's difficult to legislate about this, but there are a lot of possibilities, and we have still a long way to go in this sense.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aurora. Fionnuala, what would you like to say now as a kind of final thought?
I suppose one thing that I was very happy to see in this report was the official recognition of travellers in Ireland as an ethnic group. Now, travellers in Ireland would be a very marginalised group. So the state's formal recognition of the distinct heritage, culture and identity of travellers and of their special place in Irish society, I think it was both symbolically and socially important for Ireland, and I was glad to see that in the report.
Great, thank you. Mary Elizabeth.
The role of religious and filling the gaps. And I want to mention an association in which we're involved, set up by a Colombian 20 years ago sister, and it's called Wasi Warmi, and it fills the gaps of support for women. One of the biggest difficulties is, no matter what the legislation, if the women are not assertive enough, if they haven't the education, if they haven't support, they can't access their rights. And this organization involves a whole lot of other organizations who give their time voluntarily to support the victim, we'll say victim, from the very beginning to the end of the process. And that's really a wonderful thing. The other little thing I want to mention is that, yes, in Peru, for example, where there are laws about climate change, there is the transverse, whatever, you know, the women are included, and it's insisting that women attend the meetings about watering, about whatever response there is to the growing desertification in the country.
Great.
So centers have been set up all over the country. There is a change. It's coming slowly, but there is a change of attitude, and there's more access by women to their rights.
Thank you very much, Mary Elizabeth. Now let's go to Africa. Pat.
Yeah, I think education is the key, and I think that starts with education of basic human rights, especially for women in the rural areas who have never been to school and who are subject to patriarchal customary law, because that's big and it's very discriminatory against women. So I think educating women about their basic rights, and then progressively, you know, sort of getting girls into school, secondary school and colleges, because I think once you are educated, then you have more awareness of what your rights are. You're more empowered to speak out about your rights and that. And I think just on the question of the church, I think certainly in Africa, the church has played a very big role and continues to. And I mean, it disappointed me a little bit at the recent conference I was at, where our national planning director said that faith-based groups ought not to just not hold the government to account, but complement the government more. And really in Africa, the churches and the faith-based organizations of all traditions are very much complementing the work and supporting, doing more in many ways than what the government is. It's the first place that people run to, church and faith-based groups, for help. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mariam from Morocco.
Hello again. I just want to say regarding the last question that there is a big gap between law and reality. Because one thing is the law that is beautiful, and the other is the real life, where many of the laws have not been put into practice. Having said that, there are advances, such as, for instance, women's participation in politics. There are some already in the parliament. There is women's access to work outside their home. There is greater freedom in education, and in some places, girls are beyond boys in their advance. The 2004 Family Code reflects great advances for women. We appreciate also the following improvements. Women's decision regarding marriage is not only the man, they can say yes or no. Ownership of the mother towards her children. Before, it was only the father that was appointed or was acknowledged as the father. The mother was somebody in second equality. There is also equality in rights and duties between the spouses. Grandchildren of a daughter can access to the inheritance of their grandmother. There is equal initiative of the wife to request a divorce. Before, it was only the husband. Single mothers can give their last name to their children. That was not possible before. And participation of women in politics, as I say. Women's rights to property are already acknowledged.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they're amazing. They're amazing. I mean, it's really good to see it, at least that they're trying to move on with all of that, you know. And it's the same.
Excuse me, I just want to say the last sentence is about some of the women said here. They need to know their rights. Many of them don't know their rights, especially in the rural areas, and they need to know it so as to claim them. And some of our women say that even some of them, they know nothing. They know nothing about their rights.
Right. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much.
Good. Now, we'll move over now to Albania. And Imelda, I don't know if you even could say something of what you've seen from the last 25 years.
Well, I think that the big, huge shifts that are happening in front of all of us, including Albania, is the massive migration, both within and without the country. It's just incredible. The mobility is just incredible in my experience here. And the other big issue that is happening like just around us is the breakdown of the structures of organizations. And we're even seeing it in our own congregation, the massive impact of technology. And for me, in Albania, the conflict between secularization and religion, all of these things are actually impounding us. And I think that women are going to have a massive, massive say in this upside down world that we're all involved in the crashing within, if you understand. So I just feel we have to keep our feet really well on the ground, and we have to listen and go with the flow, but keep our women and girls safe, but also leaders in this massive, massive transformation that's happening within our societies today.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Catherine, what would your final thoughts be now to the world?
Two comments, Cecilia. One is that in 2018, the British government we were celebrating the centenary of the suffragette movement in this country, which was huge, as you know, and many new initiatives were introduced then. 1.5 million pounds for community projects, a suite of education projects, 7 towns to celebrate the suffrage history, and money for women to get onto the first rung of political career, and so on. And that was really good. But as I was saying before, and so many other people have said, some of these initiatives are very random in the way they are actually enforced. However, I want to finish with something that I don't think anybody's mentioned, and I'm sure I'm speaking here for all our schools, but I want to say something about the schools particularly that I work in, and I want to refer also to the big march that took place in Bristol, I think it was yesterday, on climate change, that was inspired by Greta Thunberg. And this was not these were not Catholic schools specifically, they were schools in general, but they symbolise for me the way our young people are really becoming very, very, not only very proactive, but very sensitive and very aware of the needs of the world around them. And I'm speaking now specifically for our own schools, all 5 of which are run brilliantly by lay head teachers. And they are definitely producing leaders of the future in terms of their concern for the earth, their concern about homelessness, and their very practical ideas about how they, as young people, can help the world to be a better place.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Catherine. Yes, and I think the fact that we're educators is essential point in all of this. Now, Cynthia, what are your final words to the group, because we're running out of time? Just what would you like to say?
I would like to tell the whole world, respect the human rights of everyone, especially of women and girls. And we need to stop working in silos and work with all stakeholders, including the government, local and national governments. Together we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Francesca, would you like to come in there and say a few words to finish off? I know you've been terribly busy the whole time.
No, I just want to reiterate that I think we've all spoken about it. I think someone said here in the chat, which I thought was nice, we can learn, it was from Angela, we can learn such a lot from Mary Ward still. We still have to catch up with her vision. But I think it's a great start that we have this vision and we have this inspiration as well that we can keep following. So I think as long as we stay on that track, I think we are doing the best that we can.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. And from me here in New York as well, a big thank you to all of you. Thanks for all the work you put into preparing it, panels, but I think it was worthwhile. And it's wonderful to have a conversation like this that is about, it's about the general rather than the party politics. It's another way of looking at the whole world of governance. Yeah. So thank you very much, and thanks to our participants from around the world. And then let's hope, sometime down the line we will have more of these. You never know. But yeah, so all the best to everybody, and goodbye now.